Hello there. Welcome to the Vinyl Attic. For another episode of Vinyl Fetish, we're doing our 100 albums that should be in your collection. It's not a countdown or a count up. It's just 100 vinyl albums that should be in a true record collector's collection. We're kind of trying to find ones that are sort of on the margin. So we are... One of the things we're not going to be talking about are any Beatle albums. We talk a lot about the Beatles on Vinyl Fetish. We talk about the Beatles all the time. And pretty much every Beatle album should be in your collection. Whether it's Please, 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 Please Me. There's an extra please there. Or Let It Be, or anything in between, including the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. They should all be in your collection. We all know this. So we are going to focus on some solo records. We're going to at least have one from each of the four fabs in our collection. We had a great discussion about Paul McCartney's Tug of War album a little bit. Today we're going to talk about Ringo, since Ringo, age 83, is still out there hitting the sticks on tour, singing and dancing. Cozy and I saw him over the summer in concert, doing jumping jacks and singing Octopus's Garden and doing all things Ringo.
What goes on in your heart? What goes on in your mind? You are tearing me apart. When you treat me so unkind. What goes on in your mind?
So we're going to talk about a Ringo album that it might not be on your radar. And that's his 1976 album, Ringo's Rotogravure. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Rotogravure. And here's why this album is important. And in the first half of the 70s, Ringo, out of the gate, was the Beatle that had the big hits. Surprising everyone, I think including the Beatles themselves. Certainly John and George were a little bit beleaguered by their post-Beatle experience. Paul took a while to warm up, and by the mid-70s he was going strong with Wings, but Ringo was just smashing the hits right and left, especially with his 1973 album Ringo that had Photograph and You're 16 and Oh My My and all your old favorites. He was just doing great. So when the EMI Apple contract ended in 76. The Beatles were officially an entity, a legal entity, until 1976. A lot of people don't know that. That was the end of Apple Records and their EMI contract. They were all sort of set free. Ringo had his last Apple EMI record with his greatest hits record, Blast from Your Past, with all your favorites on it. And then he was free, and he was being courted because he was such a huge star in the mid-70s by multiple record labels, including ABC Records and a couple other labels. Atlantic basically won the bidding war and got Ringo for a multi-million-dollar deal to put out 7 albums in the next 5 years. 7 albums in 5 years. Because people used to work more in those days, you see. And so he went with Atlantic. He was living in LA because of the taxes in Britain, so he was a tax exile. He had a place in Monte Carlo and he had a place in LA. Now, and he used the same kind of formula that he'd used on his previous albums, Ringo and Goodnight Vienna, to assemble the all-star cast, to have all his rock and roll friends. Yeah, so Eric Clapton is on this record, but not only are the people that you expect. Peter Frampton is on it. John, Paul, and George are represented on this record. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Rotogravure, it's really the last true Beatle product where all 4 fabs, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, participated in, that were a part of, that had kind of a collective product before John Lennon's horrible death in 1980. The way this sort of came together is they're all kind of just hanging out in LA making this record. John and Yoko come. And this is when John is basically in his house husband phase. He's retired from music. This is the end of the Lost Weekend. He's reunited with Yoko. They've had a kid. And they come to L.A. together with this song called Cookin' in the Kitchen of Love, which is a great John Lennon song written for Ringo on the record, in which John plays piano and sings on. So John's on it. Paul takes a break from the Wings Over America tour, also in LA, apparently not at the same time, which would have been amazing if it would have been, the 3 of them together. But Paul and Linda come in with a song called "Pure Gold," which is a great little ditty. It's a great little song written for Ringo. It's not the greatest Paul McCartney composition in the world, but they're on it. You hear Paul's voice on it. George had a song that Ringo loved called "I'm Still in Love with You." That's not the original title of it, but it was a song that George recorded with Ronnie Spector with Ringo on drums that Ringo always really loved, and Ringo said, I want George to be on this record also, and so he records a version of it. The sort of side story is George hated Ringo's version of it and took him to court to prevent this version from getting on the album. George failed, the record is on the album, but it's George's contribution to the record. So essentially we get all of the folks, and they're all, there's this great montage of photos of people eating food, sort of hanging out in the studio, I imagine, or at a party in LA. And so you see everyone, including Clapton and Frampton, but you also get John Lennon, Paul and Linda, and George there. So it really feels like a Beatle record. And one of the reasons I think it should be in your collection is it's a Beatle record and kind of the end of the Beatle era. The last time all four of them contributed. In fact, the back cover even sort of sums that up, which is this great picture of this door covered in graffiti is the Apple door on 3 Savile Row, which is the head of the Beatles empire in the late 60s and early 70s, Apple Records. Now that is an Abercrombie and Fitch for kids. I've been in there. I've purchased children's clothing inside this door. They won't let you go up on the roof, though. But so, there's the end of Apple with all the I Love Beatles graffiti on there. Really great record. But the other reason is, oh, hello. The other reason is the great songs. You get these really great songs. The lead-off single is on the record, A Dose of Rock and Roll, is sort of a classic Ringo for the old days, followed by Hey Baby, the Bruce Chantel. That's his name. Great song from the 60s. Hey, hey, baby, I want to know, will you be my girl? When Andy and I had Cozy, we made a little video montage that I'll include a link to in the description that used that as our sort of theme song for We're Having a Baby, which ended up being Cozy. And there's also a ton of great songs, but there's a song on here that is especially near and dear to my heart called Las Brisas. And it is a Mexican theme song. And the way this song occurred is that that Ringo and his girlfriend Nancy Andrews were in a Mexican restaurant in LA and heard an incredible mariachi band and loved the band so much that Ringo wrote a song so we'd have an excuse to invite the band into the studio to play on the record. And I know that feeling. I a few years ago, I was in a Mexican restaurant in Guadalajara. Cozy, Andy, and I were in this Mexican restaurant in Guadalajara, and the mariachi band was so phenomenal. And they're playing, like, the great singer and the musicians, and everybody's just eating their dinner. Because it's Guadalajara, and that's just the music that's playing. And my mind is exploding because this incredible music is being played while everybody's just eating their dinner. So I kind of know what Ringo felt. That song was actually released as a single in Mexico, and it is incredibly memorable and catchy. And if there's sort of one Ringo song other than the big hits that pops into my head, it's Las Brisas. I just love this song. It just so makes me think about Mexico. It's a really a great record, but the music scene, it sort of moved on a little bit, and none of the songs really broke through. They sort of bubbled under at the top 40, and it was a minor hit, but not a very big record. And people wondered what happened. What happened to Ringo? His next record, he tried to capture the wave of pop music and put out an album called Ringo the Fourth that had a disco theme produced by Eric Martin, and it's dreadful. It is just dreadful, and it was just sort of a dive for Ringo down from that point on. And so this is a really wonderful record. You can often find it in used record bands because it gets skipped over a lot, but it's just so musical, and all four Beatles are represented on it, and to hear John and Paul's voice on the record just makes it feel like a fab product. And, it makes me think about this contract that he had to put out 7 albums in five years, and how in the old days, back in the 20th century, that was not unusual for artists to put out that much music. I mean, as a kid in the 70s, It was expected that Kiss would have 2 albums out a year. The Beatles always had 2 albums out a year. I mean, there was always this notion you have an album out for the summertime and an album out for Christmas. And it's just sort of the work schedule of these artists, and maybe it worked them to death, but we got a lot of good stuff from it. And so, this is 1976, got to have an album out for 1976. This is the album. Maybe it's not the greatest album in the world, but we got Ringo 76. We got that artist. I mean, think about the artist now. When will we get a Coldplay record or a U2 record? Or, sometimes it just takes years. And your Semisonic just put out an album last month. The first album in 22 years. 22 years, Semisonic. Closing time. I mean, they could be putting out 2 albums a year instead of 2 albums in 22 years. So this, you guys... All right, hold on. Say hello. Oh, this is the play date. Oh no, we're having a play date. Okay, you guys.
We were up here the whole time.
Where was I? Oh, is that now we have a sort of a different work schedule in music that we have to wait, and that notion of a band having an album out every year, or maybe even a couple times a year, to have a sense of what their statement was for 2023, 2024, maybe the spring of 2024 and the fall of 2024. Like, we don't get that anymore. We don't get that sort of notion that people are taking what's going on in the world and immediately translate. We might get a Beyonce album that sort of drops all of a sudden, and all of a sudden we have a Beyonce record that we weren't thinking about. But that notion of an artist has a relationship with its audience where it's sort of, there's a duty to report on the musical trends and the musical thoughts and the personal experience they're going through at least once a year. At least once a year. I mean, you can look at a picture of the Beatles and know exactly what year that picture was taken by what their hair looks like. Do they have mustaches? Does Paul have a mustache or not have a mustache? Does John have a beard and glasses? I mean, you kind of just look at it and know what moment in time that represents. And we really don't get that anymore. We're sort of separated from the context of time in our music. So this record is really a great opportunity to capture a moment in time, 1976, recorded during the bicentennial. And it's a really great forgotten gem. If you're a fan of the Beatles and you have a soft spot for Ringo, you really should have Ringo's Rotogravure in your collection. Okay. Next, people that know me know that I've been on a little bit of a Robert Fripp binge. I've been into some Frippertronics, a lot of Brian Eno, King Crimson, and so that's a little tease for what the next album is going to be in our discussion. But let's celebrate the people that work hard. And Ringo 83 is still working hard to make music. Had a great record out this year, a great EP. It was one of my favorites of the year, and is still on tour and working hard. And let's celebrate that work ethic among our favorite musicians, shall we? Ringo matters. Rotogravure matters. You matter. This music matters. Let's talk about it.